Hey, before we start, I want you to do something for me. Think about the last time someone told you something really exciting, like genuinely thrilling news, and your reaction was fine. Like you smiled, maybe said, "That's great," and moved on. Or think about the last time something sad happened, and instead of feeling it, you just kind of watched it from behind glass, like you were observing your own life instead of living it. If any of that sounds familiar, this video is for you. Today, we're talking about emotional detachment. Not the dramatic Hollywood version where someone stares blankly at a wall. I'm talking about the quiet, creeping kind. The kind that sneaks up on you so slowly that by the time you notice it, you can't quite remember when you stopped feeling things the way you used to. And here's the thing, it's way more common than you think, especially right now, especially in America where we're collectively exhausted, overstimulated, and quietly drowning in a culture that demands we perform wellness while privately shutting down. So let's talk about the seven signs. And more importantly, why this happens. Because understanding the why is the first step to actually doing something about it. Let's get into it. Sign one, you feel like you're watching your life from a distance. You know that feeling when you're at a party, surrounded by people you like, and yet somehow you're not really there. Like you're hovering above the scene, watching yourself laugh and talk, but you're not plugged in. Psychologists call this depersonalization, a sense of being detached from your own thoughts, feelings, sensations, and actions. And when it becomes a pattern rather than just an occasional weird moment, it's one of the clearest early signs of emotional detachment. Here's what this might look like in daily life. You're at your kid's birthday party and you look around and think, I should feel happy right now. But it's more like an intellectual observation than an actual feeling. You're going through the motions, the hugs, the candles, the cake. But emotionally, you're in screensaver mode. Or maybe you're in an argument with your partner, and instead of feeling hurt or angry, you're just analyzing the argument like it's a debate you read about. Detached, clinical, elsewhere. Why does this happen? Often it's a protective response. Your nervous system is smart. When life becomes too overwhelming, too much stress, too much grief, too much anxiety, your brain essentially pulls a circuit breaker. It creates emotional distance between you and the experience to prevent overload. It can also happen after prolonged periods of high stress, trauma, or even just years of suppressing your feelings because life required you to hold it together. After long enough, holding it together becomes the default, and the distance you created for protection starts to feel like home. Sign two, other people's emotions. Feel exhausting or irrelevant. Think about the people in your life who come to you with their problems. A friend venting about their relationship. A family member crying about something that happened at work. A coworker stressed about a deadline. Do you genuinely feel for them? Or has it started to feel like a performance? Like you're running a script. Nod here, say, that sounds really hard. Offer advice. Wrap up the conversation. But internally, there's this low hum of, I just want this to be over. That's not cruelty. That's not even a character flaw. It's a sign. When we're emotionally detaching, we often lose access to empathy. Or more accurately, empathy becomes effortful in a way it never used to be. Things that used to move you just don't. Someone else's pain doesn't land the same way. You know you should care, you just can't quite get there. Why does this happen? This is often tied to something called compassion fatigue, a state of exhaustion that comes from being exposed to too much suffering, either directly in your own life or vicariously through others, through the news, through social media. When you're already running on empty emotionally, you have nothing left to extend to other people. It's also tied to a phenomenon called emotional numbing, which researchers have linked to chronic stress and burnout. Basically, your brain learns that feeling equals pain, and it starts to cut off the supply. Unfortunately, it can't selectively numb just the bad stuff. It numbs the good stuff too. And then other people's emotions start to feel like noise rather than signal. Sign 3. You've stopped looking forward to things. Can you remember the last time you were genuinely excited about something? Not performatively excited, like actually felt that warm, buzzy anticipation in your chest? One of the quieter signs of emotional detachment is what psychologists sometimes call anhedonia, the loss of interest or pleasure in activities and experiences that used to bring joy. And it doesn't have to be dramatic to count. It can be small things. You used to love Saturday mornings. Now they feel like something to get through. You used to love a certain TV show. Now you watch it out of habit, not because it gives you anything. You used to feel a little flutter of excitement planning a trip. Now you're mostly just going through the logistics. None of this is laziness. None of it is ingratitude. It's disconnection, a gap between you and your own capacity for joy. Why does this happen? Chronic stress depletes dopamine, the neurotransmitter most closely associated with anticipation and reward. When you've been operating in survival mode for a long time, your brain starts hoarding its resources. It stops generating enthusiasm for the future because the present demands everything it has. Depression is also closely linked to this symptom, and emotional detachment and depression often travel together. If the flatness has been going on for more than a few weeks, it's worth taking seriously. Sign 4. You've become an expert at avoiding deep conversations quick test. When someone asks you, "How are you really doing?" What happens in your body? If your instinct is to change the subject, deflect with humor, or give a perfectly crafted, emotionally vague answer that technically says something while revealing nothing, that's worth looking at. Emotionally detached people often become masters of surface living. Conversations stay in the shallow end. Weather, work, plans, logistics, anything that might require actual emotional vulnerability gets quietly, skillfully redirected. And the exhausting part? A lot of people around you probably don't even notice because you're good at it. You come across as private rather than closed off, thoughtful rather than avoidant, composed rather than numb. Why does this happen? Deep conversations require emotional access. If you've disconnected from your own feelings, you can't really share them. And when someone invites you into depth, it can create a kind of internal panic. Not because you don't care about the person, but because going inward feels dangerous. Like you might not find anything, or you might find too much. This is also a pattern that often develops in childhood for people raised in households where emotions weren't safe to express, where vulnerability was met with dismissal, criticism, or punishment. The lesson learned early: stay on the surface, stay safe. And that lesson can follow you well into adulthood without you ever consciously knowing it's there. Sign 5. Conflict doesn't affect you the way it used to. Here's a counterintuitive one. You might think that emotional detachment means you've become calmer in conflict, less reactive, more zen, and in some ways, maybe. But there's a difference between genuine equanimity, where you can navigate difficult conversations from a grounded, secure place, and flat disengagement, where you just don't care anymore. If you've noticed that arguments with people you love no longer land emotionally, if you can sit through a tense conversation with a partner or a family member and feel essentially nothing, that's not growth, that's distance. The same goes for the absence of repair seeking. Healthy relationships involve ruptures and repairs. When something goes wrong, you feel the discomfort, and that discomfort motivates you to reconnect. But when you're emotionally detached, the rupture happens and you feel nothing pushing you to fix it. You can just leave it indefinitely. Why does this happen? This is often what happens after a long period of unresolved emotional pain in relationships. The heart can only break so many times before it learns to stop investing. It's adaptive. In the short term, it protects you from getting hurt. In the long term, it hollows out your relationships until they're technically functional but emotionally empty. Attachment theory has a name for this: dismissive avoidant attachment. It's not a life sentence, it's a learned strategy that can be unlearned, but it starts by recognizing it. Sign 6. You've become numb to things that should move you. A child crying in a commercial, a news story about a community devastated by a disaster, a beautiful piece of music that used to make you tear up, a movie moment that once cracked you open. If you've noticed that these things just bounce off you now, if you find yourself watching something deeply sad and thinking, why don't I feel anything? That's a meaningful signal. Now, this isn't about forcing yourself to cry at everything. Emotional range isn't measured in tears, but there's a difference between being moved and not expressing it outwardly versus genuinely no longer registering things that carry emotional weight. Many people who are emotionally detaching describe this as feeling like they're behind glass or wrapped in cotton wool, close to something but separated from its impact. Why does this happen? This is one of the more common long term effects of chronic emotional suppression. Over time, if you've trained yourself not to feel, often out of necessity, often to function, the suppression becomes automatic. It's no longer something you choose, it's something your nervous system does for you, reflexively without your permission. Trauma, both big T trauma and the accumulated small t kind, also profoundly impacts the brain's ability to process and respond to emotional stimuli. The amygdala, which processes emotional responses, can become dysregulated after prolonged stress or traumatic experiences, leading to this muffled, dampened emotional landscape. Sign 7. You've started to prefer being alone, not joyfully, but numbly. There's a version of solitude that is nourishing. The introvert recharging after a full day, the creative mind needing quiet, the person who genuinely loves their own company. This is not that. The sign I'm talking about is a different flavor of alone, where you withdraw, not because solitude energizes you, but because people drain you, where social plans feel like obligations you're enduring, where the idea of staying home and existing in a quiet, low stimulation bubble is less about joy and more about relief from having to feel anything at all. If being around people has started to feel like work, not occasionally, but constantly, and if the company you most want is your own, not because you love yourself deeply, but because yourself is the only company that doesn't require you to show up emotionally, that's worth sitting with. Why does this happen? Social withdrawal often accompanies emotional detachment because connection requires emotional availability. When you're running a deficit, connection feels impossible. Or worse, it feels threatening because it might crack open something you've been working hard to keep closed. This can spiral. The less you connect, the more your tolerance for connection decreases. The more isolated you become, the more normal the numbness feels. And before long, you can't quite remember what it felt like to want to be around people. The bigger picture, why this is happening right now. I want to zoom out for a second because I think there's something important to say here. We are living through an era of collective emotional exhaustion. In America right now, we are dealing with the aftermath of a pandemic that isolated us for years, political tension that has eroded community and trust, economic anxiety that never fully goes away, and a social media landscape designed to provoke but not to connect. On top of that, many of us were raised in cultures, family cultures, regional cultures, American culture broadly, that treated emotional expression as weakness. Toughen up. Don't be so sensitive. Be the bigger person. Keep moving. We learned to perform okayness while quietly shutting down inside. And now, after years and years of that, a lot of us are emotionally detached, not because we're broken, but because we adapted. We survived. And our nervous system did exactly what it was designed to do. But surviving and living aren't the same thing. And at some point, the distance you created to protect yourself becomes the thing that's isolating you. What to do about it? Here's the good news. Emotional detachment is not a permanent state. It is not who you are. It is what you've learned to do, and what is learned can be unlearned. A few places to start. Name it. The simple act of recognizing I'm emotionally detached is more powerful than it sounds. You can't reconnect with something you haven't acknowledged you've lost. Start small. You don't have to dive into deep emotional processing on day one. Start by noticing one feeling per day. Just one. Put a name to it. Let it exist for 30 seconds without running from it. Get a therapist. I know. You've heard this before, but for real, the patterns we've talked about today, avoidant attachment, chronic emotional suppression, trauma related numbing, these are things a skilled therapist can genuinely help with, not in a vague, talk about your feelings way. In a concrete, neuroscience backed, this is why your brain does this way. EMDR, somatic therapy, and IFS, internal family systems, are particularly effective for this kind of work. Move your body. This sounds too simple to be real, but the research is overwhelming. Physical movement, especially rhythmic movement like walking, running, or dancing, helps regulate the nervous system and reopen access to emotion. Stored feelings often live in the body, not the mind. Let someone in, just one person, just one vulnerable conversation. Not because it'll fix everything, but because connection is the antidote to detachment. And you can't wait until you feel ready, because the detachment is exactly what's making you feel unready. Look, if you watch this entire video and recognized yourself in multiple signs, I want you to hear this. You are not cold. You are not broken. You are not a bad partner, friend, or person. You are someone who got overwhelmed and adapted the best way you knew how. And now you're aware. And awareness, real, honest, unflinching awareness, is the beginning of everything. If this video resonated with you, share it with someone you think might need it and drop a comment below. I genuinely want to know which sign hit closest to home. No judgment here. This is a safe space. If you want to go deeper, I've linked some resources below, including books, therapist directories, and a few other videos on this channel that might help. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Don't forget subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications.